All right, cool. Okay, so the topic for tonight is release with confidence. And so I'm going to be talking about integration testing and test automation and code coverage for web service applications. Um, some of what we'll talk about here too is just applicable just without web services. You can certainly do a lot of these things we'll talk about just for code coverage and test automation in general. So a little bit about me. I'm the CTO at a healthcare startup called Arista MD. I've been developing in PHP for about 14 years now, a little longer if you include like time not being paid for it. So I've been doing it for a while. Um, I am the author of a package called Dialect, which is supports some advanced Postgres stuff for Eloquent. So things like JSON data types and things like that. If you want to do some things that normal Eloquent wouldn't give you. So specifically for Laravel. About me, I like to surf, scuba dive, travel, and read. I'm a San Diego native, so if you haven't seen one before, we're like unicorns. This is it, man. You never heard it before. This is it. This is so yeah. See, the last movie I watched was What We Do in the Shadows. I don't know, let's throw something in there. It's very funny, by the way, for anybody who's interested. And I occasionally say something at this blog and on Twitter at Daryl Kuhn. It's probably not worth subscribing to either of those things because I say something once a year, but anyway. People post these things, so I figure I better post it too. All right. So ground we're going to cover tonight. We're going to go over a couple tools, one called Postman, which is for calling web services. We're going to go over Jenkins, which is a build automation tool. And then we're going to talk about how we can do some test automation using these two tools together and how we can generate code coverage reports. And then I'll talk a little bit about my own, get on my soapbox, right, and talk a little bit about philosophy around test automation and coverage. So one thing to note is, like I said, we're going to be popping in and out of this presentation and into code and into Jenkins and all this stuff. The little app that we have is built on Laravel 5, so you'll see that. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about how Laravel works. And nothing here is really specific to Laravel. In fact, a lot of these concepts you could take to completely different languages. So feel free to stop me at any time too and ask a question, interrupt me, no problem. So I'm going to be using a fictitious application called fooblog. And it's up on GitHub, on my GitHub account, so you can download it. The code and the Postman stuff that we're building are all going to be there, so it's a pretty good starting point if you want to take what you see here and do something on your own. There's this really simple authentication layer, OAuth-style authentication layer, mechanism to get some user data, and then a mechanism to add and update blogs and some things like that. Don't use it as a reference for how to implement OAuth or something like that because it's really hacked together real quick just for this demo. Okay, so before I dig into it, just so I make sure I know who I'm talking to here, who is familiar with the term API? Everybody feel good? API? Okay, cool. Who is familiar with the term REST or RESTful? Okay, and who's going to correct me when I use them interchangeably? Okay, you guys got it. I'm sorry. Out. Okay. All right. All right. Who has consumed a web service? Okay. Built a web service? Okay. Who's built unit tests? Okay. Integration tests? Does everybody, who knows the difference between a unit test and an integration test? Yeah. So much broader in scope. A unit test is going to give you this really little granular thing that you're testing in code. I've also heard sort of integration test, functional test, and unit test is sort of three different things. So whatever. But functional or integration testing, people will often use them interchangeably. Broader in scope, testing multiple things at a time. Integration testing often is sort of at the highest level where you're testing your application. Does your application work? As opposed to this bit of code. All right, who knows what code coverage is? Okay, good. All right, awesome. Who's using test automation now? 1, 2, okay. And who's ever published a change of production and then crossed their fingers? All right, good. You guys are in the right place. Awesome. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to look at is something called Postman. Postman is an API workflow tool. It's totally free. It's awesome. You can really quickly create requests. So web service calls, or you can send up XML or JSON or whatever. We're going to take a look at it. The requests get organized into collections. So you basically just, I want to get this or I want to post this, whatever. They all get into these sort of folders, if you will, or collections of calls. You can switch contexts really easily with something called environments. So I can have a collection of calls, like get user data, post user data. And then I've got an environment that says what URL I'm going to, or what authentication maybe my bearer token or my password or whatever, and I'll show you how that works. It's really easy to switch back and forth. You might be working in your sandbox, and then boom, you want to hop over to test. Very easy to do. There's an add-on called Jetpacks. It's $10, well worth it. We're going to use it here. I'll show you what it does and why you'd want it. But you basically can write simple JavaScript to test the responses that you get back in Postman. And then finally, there's a companion tool called Newman, which is a command line runner for Postman. So you'll use a nice GUI interface, Postman, to build out these requests. You save out these collections of requests, and then you can run them on the command line.
So when I first started using this, Eric asked me if I knew why it was called Newman.
I have no idea why it's called Newman.
You don't know?
No, why is it called Newman?
Well, I mean, I have my idea. Seinfeld. Newman was the postman.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to go with that. Newman. Okay. So,
That's what I'm doing.
so we're gonna open up Postman and actually do some calls with it. But before we do, I'm just going to familiarize you real quick with the interface. So on the left-hand side here, you can see collections. So I've got these little folders that I can open up, and inside I've got different requests that I can make. So post and get requests and so forth. Then inside of the request area, I've got environments. So that's that little drop down at the top there. I can choose different environments to point to, and these are what hold the variables. And then you can see, for example, here I've got, hopefully if you can read it, API-server is in double brackets or curly braces, and that's a variable that will get expanded. So I will set API-server in my environment, and then it will be expanded in the URL that I call. Variables can go into headers. They can go into the post body or any part of the request, really. I can also choose from a variety of different verbs that HTTP supports. Obviously, get, post, put, delete, those are the common ones, but there's a lot of other stuff in there, options and trace and a bunch of other things you might want to use. And then you can, for example, in this case, we've got a post request. You can pass up a post body, and we're going to pass up some JSON. And then when you hit send, you get a response back, and it gives you, if you're setting your headers properly and so forth, it'll detect that it's, the content type here, for example, is JSON, and it'll render it out nicely. It's easy for you to read. It'll also give you the status code of the response as well, and the time it took, and there's these other tabs here you can see, like cookies, so you can get the full information about the response that comes back. And then finally, tests, and this is part of Jetpacks. These are two examples of tests that are written. So you set a tests array. There's an array called tests. You could set the attributes or the values in there, and you're just basically setting true or false, statements that are true or false. So when you run, then you can see down below those two tests that I created is status code is 200 and report data has complete structure. Those show up down below that they both passed. Questions so far? Yes?
On the first one, the post body, can I use the response post body as a variable for the next request that I want to run?
I'll show it to you. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're gonna bust out now into Postman. Okay, so I've set up this fictitious application called fooblog. I'm gonna create a new environment. Actually, before I even do that, I'll just make a request. Okay, so here I'm basically passing up a header, a content type application JSON. It's not fooblog, okay, and I'm going to get a response back. So I'm just fake data. I used Faker to throw a bunch of data into this application. Now, what I can do is take this, turn that into a variable, and set an environment. So I'm going to create a new environment called fooblog. I'm going to set API server to this. And we'll see that the request fails.
You gotta pick your environment.
Oh, thank you. So there you go. So now we get our response back, and we can actually preview the request here. There's a preview button, so we'll see that that variable gets expanded. If there's other things like other bits of header or whatever, that would all show up in here as well. So now what I can do is I can go over this there's history of what I've called and then collections. I can actually save this request. I'm going to add it to a collection. I'm going to create a new collection called foodblog, and I'm going to call this list blogs. Okay, so now I've started my collection. I've got one request in there. This is the response back. So for example, here this first request is blog number 2. I could, for example, throw in the 2 there and hit send, and I'm going to get just that blog. I can add that to the collection. I can call it get blog 2, put it into foodblog. And now I'm starting to build out, just as I'm exploring the application and doing work with it, I'm starting to build out my collection. So we use this at Arista MD, and it's the main tool that we use to sort of develop and test against. And the great thing is then we can take this directly and feed it into our test automation, which is what we're going to show here. So that's how we can make some requests there. The next thing that we'll want to do is actually, I'll show you making a post request. So for example, if I wanted to log in, I'm going to copy and paste some stuff here. I'm going to make a post request to this URL. So this allows us to do a simple OAuth style authentication. I'm going to pass up this content, and everything is right. We get a response back. We get our access token and our refresh token. Add that to our collection. Log in. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is test these responses, make sure that the data that we're getting back is what we expect. So for example, we can run back up to this test here, or this request. We could put in a test. Now, this test is actually going to fail. If we look at tests, we see that it fails. It fails because we're checking response code at 201. In fact, that's not our response code. It's 200. So we're going to fix that. And now we pass. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to do the same thing here. 200. And in login, we can put our test in here. That's fine. But we want to do something a little more interesting. What you mentioned was, can we take the response, in this case, get our access token, and then make a subsequent request with that access token and show that we're logged in? So the way that we do that is here. So in this case, we're just setting a data object, which is going to be the result of parsing the response body. And then Postman gives us a function, series of functions, but one of them is to set an environment variable. In this case, I'm going to set access token to the value of access token as exposed in the data object. So if we do that, so we pass the test, and that's great. And now we have access token in our environment variables. This is the value that we just got back. If we look at our body, you can see the body here is whatever, it's D77, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing, right? So we just pulled this data back. Now we can make another request. We're going to throw up our auth token. So again, here I'm just wrapping this in curly braces, right? And it's going to be expanded. I'm going to actually get my user. So I'm logging in as foo at foodblog.com, and that should roughly work. Tests won't pass, but there we go. And let's see if that works. No. What did I do? Server user me. Think. Yes. Thank you. There we go. So now it's it recognizes who I am, me, from the fact that I've, passing up my bearer token and I'm authenticated as food blogger. And again, I'll add this to my collection as get me. Okay, so now we've got a pretty simple, sort of script, if you will, collection of things we can run. Inside the UI, we have something called a collection runner. So we can choose our food blog collection and our food blog environment, and we can run everything here in our UI. So that's nice. We can see all passes. Okay. We can also
Wait, where did you get that at?
collection runner.
Collection runner? Okay.
Yeah, it brings up a separate little window, and then you can choose your collection and your environment.
I've been using this to roll the whole I mean, not wrong, just I have not been using it to its full capacity.
Yeah.
Taught me so much in 10 minutes.
I gotta go home, I got shit to do. So much stuff to do.
Yeah.
Collection runner is just part of Jetpacks, though, as well.
Is it part of Jetpacks?
You gotta pay.
I gotta pay for it then. Dude.
I already got
Yeah, give them $10.
It's totally worth it.
They earn their money. Okay. So then the other thing that we can do is we can save this collection. We can actually, I haven't used it yet. There's up here, you'll see this thing called enable sync. I haven't used it, but if you're working with a team, you can automatically, as I change collections, they're just like magically push out to all of your team and everybody gets updates, and it's supposed to be really cool.
They released it as part of the beta.
Oh, you were?
Just a few weeks ago.
So you've been using it? How do you like it?
I love it.
Yeah?
But I can't figure out how to add teams. It's like I can't add anybody to my team.
I don't know, but part of the beta, I just said, here's my team. And
Really? Yeah, I got the sync thing going, so I assumed if I ever needed, if I logged back in on another machine, I'd get all my collections back. But I can't. It seems like to add a team, I have to buy more licenses.
Well, maybe they all.
they
No,
probably each have to have one, maybe.
I don't.
Well, that was my thing. I said, well, what if my team member already has a license? Can I just add them? I don't see how to do that.
Yeah, I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, that's really the magic of it is like I've got, whatever, we're 6 people working across the country and we all just sort of amazingly get the latest and greatest from each other.
I was actually the place I was working at. I was doing exports and emailing them.
Yeah.
And we were trying to keep them all in sync, and it's
Kind of a pain.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the sync feature. That's great. What we're actually going to do here is share. You can share up to the Postman website if you want to make it easy to distribute out to somebody else, but it's public. We're going to do is just download it. So I've got my collection here. It's called collection. And I'm also going to save out my environment. Manage. Save. Okay, cool. And now what I can do is I can go to the command line. And I can run a command. So this strictly isn't necessarily this insecure flag, but it's bitten me a few times. So if you are in your sandbox and you are using a self-signed certificate, you need the insecure flag. Otherwise, you're going to get all kinds of errors, and it's really not descriptive about why it's failing. So just FYI. Okay, if you're not using HTTPS or if you're using a valid cert, you don't need that flag. But we're going to use this local.json environment file that I saved and this collection that I saved, and we're going to output the results of the test to this location. Actually, before I run that, let me just show you.
Can you increase the size of the font?
I maybe can try. Let's see here. I have no idea even where I would begin to do that.
Is that putty?
Yeah. Yeah.
So go under change settings.
Where am I? Change settings. Okay, perfect.
And then there should be a appearance. Yep. And right there, change.
You guys and your advanced Windows machines.
How's,
Touch the Windows machine.
Is that big?
That stuff
is that big enough? Do I need to make this bigger? I'll make it. Let me know. You're good, but you're in the second row.
Yeah.
Who's in the back? Can you guys actually see this? Do you care?
Yeah.
Just here for the beer.
It could be a little bigger.
Make it a little bigger.
Make it a little bigger.
How do you do?
If only it were this easy.
Red and bold it too.
And bold?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, good. All right. So let me just show you quickly what this looks like. It's not any magic secret sauce. It's just a JSON file. It's pretty straightforward. And so here we have the two variables that we'd saved. And this access token thing is going to get overwritten. In fact, you don't even have to have it in here, but it'll get overwritten anyway. It doesn't matter.
So if it's not there, it'll add it?
It will add it.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So let's run this. Whoa. Okay. So now those things that we just built, we get a nice little colorful output that says we called blog/2, we authenticated, and then we got our response. All of our tests passed. Okay, right now we're just testing response code. That's not particularly exciting. We'll show some more examples later where we can actually inspect the result. Like, so for example, when I call user/me, I know that I've authenticated as foo@fooblog.com, and my name should be fooblog, right? So, so I can test that the result is what I expect, and there isn't something broken along the way. I think that's enough for now. Okay, good. All right, so questions so far?
Are you running local then? I mean, is this
is all running locally.
Is there a server component?
Oh yeah, like I've got a local web server running that, and I'll show you some of the code that's running behind the scenes. Yes.
Postman has a server component.
No.
Okay.
No, I am running my own web server. I've got my own host entry. So like you see the URL there, that's foodblog.loc. That's like I've got a host entry pointed to my local dev machine that's serving these pages up.
But Newman would be the application that you run on your test server.
Yeah. You'd run Newman, and then what you'd really do is you would just swap this out. So instead of local.json, it would point to api.test.foodblog.com. or whatever, or it could point to localhost or whatever your server's, willing to respond to. Cool. Okay, so that's Postman. Super powerful all by itself. If you leave now, you've learned something hopefully useful. Next thing we're going to look at is something called Jenkins. So Jenkins is a build automation tool. The URL's there in the presentation, and I think we'll put this up online or whatever, right? So it's also free. What it does is you create jobs, or items, I think is what it calls it in there, but I call them jobs, whatever, which is just a series of actions to run in a sequence and some decision logic. So you can have, for example, a shell command, inspect the results of that shell command, and then if it succeeds, push out, build artifacts. If it fails, email your team or something like that. It'll keep a history of the jobs that you run and who ran them and what the result was. And it's got a plugin architecture that makes it easy for you to add. You can customize it yourself if you're so inclined. There's a whole slew of plugins that are out there. Some of the stuff that I use, we use a Git client. So in our real world environment, we have our code in GitHub, and we pull from the specified branch that we want to pull from. We run composer install. We do all of our testing. Everything looks good. We push it out. We're going to use tonight JUnit and Clover PHP to inspect the results of our testing, so that we only would build if the test succeeds, and Clover PHP to show the code coverage. There's something called post-build scripts, which I use. So for example, I only want to deploy my artifacts, my built code, if everything passed. You would do that in a post-build script. It's a plugin. Also, one thing that I use that's super handy if you're in a bigger environment is an LDAP plugin. So we have an LDAP server that people authenticate against. So we can have that one central environment that I can control who has access to Jenkins. I can also control what they can do. So I have some developers, all they're allowed to do is push the build button. I have other folks who are actually allowed to go in and change the build scripts and add new build scripts and stuff like that. So you can have a pretty fine-grained control over who can do what. So this is what Jenkins looks like. There's a build now button, easy button. It gives you a little build history with what activity is going on. With the Clover PHP plugin installed and the JUnit plugin installed, we get this nice dashboard overview of code coverage and test trends. It's really static right here because this is off of my sandbox environment, and I build 10 times a day. Not much changes. Yeah, build history. So you can see kind of an indicator. Blue is passing, red is failing, yellow is unstable, and there are different ways that you can define that. So you can choose, for example, if I pass 90% of my test cases, it's unstable, but I'm going to build anyway because I'm in a test environment, right? Versus my production environment, I want to pass 100% of the time. And then with the code coverage stuff, you can actually drill in. We're going to show a little more what this looks like, but you can actually see file by file, line by line, which lines of code are executed during all of your tests, which tests executed those lines of code. Gives you really, really good insight into how good your testing is and sort of where you need to focus your testing. Okay, so real simple. Then we're going to build a job. Nope, that's not the one I want. There we go. Okay, so this is Jenkins. It's installed. There's like nothing there. There's no jobs. I have already installed some of the plugins that I talked about. So there's already Clover PHP. There's actually an interface inside of Manage Jenkins here. You can go and list installed plugins and install plugins straight from the interface. Very, very easy. Okay, so I'm going to create a new. I'll see. Look, here it's create a new job, but up here it's a new item. Internal consistency. Come on. All right, so I'm going to call this foo blog. It's going to be a freestyle project. And we can pull from Git, for example, which you might do in the real world. That's not what we're going to do here. What I'm going to do is throw in this shell command to run PHP unit. So I have, just FYI, a single test. It's very simple. It's just to sort of demonstrate for the purposes of this demonstration here. So it's going to run that command. Until it's run that command. And then when it's done, after the build, I'm going to publish the results here. Can I, where my, excuse,
You need to check that.
This here?
Yeah.
No, that's just like a poorly designed icon because they do UI badly. No, yeah, that's not a box of any kind of checking. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now, one thing that I do have to do because I'm building locally is it has this concept of a workspace that it's building in. That's empty right now. And I'm just going to link it to Okay, so I'm going to link our current foo blog that we're working into where Jenkins expects this code to be. So it's not really magic here, but like I said, if you're in the real world where you're building from Git, it would populate this workspace automatically. You would just pull the code in from GitHub or from wherever you'd like to keep your code. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and build. Okay, cool. So it's pretty straightforward. That passed. We can see our test results here. There are no failures. We ran a single test inside of user test called test domain attribute. We can actually see the console output. This is kind of cool. So we can see that the build started, and it's building in this workspace, and it's executing our little shell command. Our shell command consists of just this one line, and this is what you would see on the command line output. So you don't have to SSH into your server. You don't have to do anything. You get full details on exactly what's going on. Okay. So we built a job. Kind of know how Postman works. Want to use these two things together. So to do that, we need to create a command to start and stop capturing coverage in our application. We're going to go into what that looks like. We need to add coverage capability so our application is executing and knows to record coverage. We need to create a command to merge the Newman results or Postman-Newman results with our PHP unit. So we've got these two different sets of things that are operating, and we want all of that in Jenkins. And then we need to configure Jenkins, the job to execute the test suite and capture all this stuff, and that'll be the last step. Okay, so before we dig into the PHP code that does this, I'm just going to briefly talk about PHP code coverage. It's authored by Sebastian Bergman, who's the author of PHP unit, so he knows what he's doing. It provides several classes that we're going to be using. I'm not going to go into the details of those things and how they work. They just work. But basically, all of the code coverage stuff is handled through this class, these classes here. So you got PHP code coverage. You got PHP code coverage filter that allows us to filter out the files that we don't want to capture coverage on. So any large project, like for example, we're using a bunch of external libraries. I don't really want to capture coverage on all those things. I just want to capture coverage on the code that I've written. And the filter allows us to do that. And then finally, we have two report classes that allow us to output Clover and HTML. Okay, so to start inside capturing coverage, unlike PHP unit, which you can pass a flag in to get coverage data out, PHP unit executes in a single thread. The whole, whatever it is, let's say you've got 1,000 tests, they all execute in a single thread. And so it can maintain state throughout that entire process and give you then one big coverage dump at the end. With web services, we've got life cycles that start and stop. And so we need to be able to persist that coverage data across those start and stops. So we need to identify at the start of the call's lifecycle that code execution should be covered, and then we need to persist that when we're all done with the request. In the example here, I'm just persisting it to a flat file. You can put it anywhere that's persistent. I use Redis in the real world. You can use whatever. All right, so we're going to take a look at app console commands test coverage. Okay, so this is a Laravel command. I'm not going to, can everybody, we okay here to read this? Okay. Are we good? Okay. I'm not going to go into like how commands work in facades, like all this stuff with Laravel. Just know that this allows us to define the name on the command line that we're going to call. So artisan is Laravel's command line application. So we can say artisan testing coverage, and it'll execute this thing. It'll execute this fire command. So what we're doing here, and again, all this is up on GitHub if you guys want to play around with it later. It's going to set two values that go into persistent storage, into cache. One is that we should be recording coverage. This just says whether or not we should be recording coverage. And I tack on the stage here in case you have like a shared environment. Let's say you're running test and dev or whatever on the same box, and they both happen to use the same Redis backend or whatever. Then this would make sure that those variables don't clobber each other if you ran them both. And likewise, so this says yes, you should be recording coverage. No, you shouldn't. And this says this is the actual coverage object that we're going to be pulling in and out of cache. We take two commands, either collect, which clears out any existing coverage data and says start recording and writes them in the command line, or it'll take write, in which case it'll define where we want to write the data, make sure there's a directory there, and it'll pull the coverage data out of the cache and then populate this Clover report and HTML report and tell them to write out the coverage data. And then it'll clear out the cache. How are we doing? Everybody good? Okay. So there's really not much to see. I'll show you kind of what that does. So here's our command line, artisan testing coverage collect. It's going to say, we're collecting. Okay, that's cool. What we can actually do is we can go back to Postman. We can run this collection of service requests. You'll see if you're watching carefully, this took a little bit longer than normal. That's because running with code coverage, PHP is doing a bunch of stuff that it wouldn't normally do, and it does take a little bit longer. So now during those execution cycles, we've been capturing that code. And then we can do a write. I'll show you that in just a second, but before I get ahead of myself. The other thing that we need to look at is adding the coverage capability to our app. So all we've done so far is said, yes, we should be recording coverage, and then a command to dump out the coverage when it's complete. We need something else so that when the request actually occurs, we can say, turn on code coverage. And in Laravel, specifically, we would do that with an HTTP middleware in Laravel 5. So what we're going to do is check if we should be recording coverage, pull any existing coverage data that we have, if it already exists, and then register a shutdown function so that when the request dies or ends, we are persisting whatever we've captured in that cycle back out in the cache. And that looks like this. That looks like this. So here, a little sanity check. Don't ever do this in production. That would be a horrible idea. These are our keys that we're interested in. So we're first going to say, should we even be recording coverage? If not, we're done. All right, that's the end of that loop. If so, if we have this key, then So if we should be recording coverage, do we already have coverage in our cache? If so, populate it, we're done. One edge case that I didn't really talk about here is we want to merge or include the PHP unit stuff. And PHP unit gives us a mechanism to save coverage data out to a PHP file. So this line actually lets us load in that, that file here. So there's a file called coverage PHP. I can show that to you. Actually, why don't I do that? Looks like this. It's literally just like a PHP file. You include this thing, it creates a coverage object and fills it with all the data that you captured. Okay. So if we have that, then we want to include it. Otherwise, we are going to create a new code coverage filter. So if we look at PHP unit XML, here, for example, I've said I only want the app directory. So this is something we do to configure PHP unit. I want to honor that in my Postman testing. So you read in that XML file, parse it, and make sure I've got all the whitelist data, and add that to the whitelist of this filter, and then instantiate a new coverage object with the filter. Then finally, I start coverage with the request method and the request path. So that's going to look something like get users or post blog 3 or something like that. That's about as good as you can get right now out of Postman. I'd really like to be able to get like the name of the specific request. You can't yet. So you'll see more what this looks like in the coverage data. So anyway, this will start the coverage, and then we're going to register a shutdown function. So when the process dies, we tell coverage to stop, and we put the coverage object back into cache. Good? Okay. So now that you know all that's happening, when we ran all of those requests in Postman using the collection runner here, this was all happening in the background, and we were collecting all this data. So now, if we execute write, we see it wrote XML and it wrote the details. So what does that look like? This is the cool stuff. So the Clover XML, that's kind of boring. It's not really readable. It looks like this. Okay, so for each one of our files that we have in our application that we've whitelisted, it's telling us whether or not it's been covered and how many methods were covered and so forth. And this is useful for our statistics that we show in Jenkins. What's useful for us to take a look at is this. So this is the output of the coverage data. So we can see here, because we ran our unit test, actually, it's included in the process. So we can see here that this is this file, and these lines of code weren't executed in any of our tests, and this line of code was executed, and it was executed by one of our unit tests, the test domain attribute unit test. Okay, we can also see within HTTP, for example, we've got the OAuth stuff was tested, right? It was tested when we logged in. And so these are the lines that were tested. And if you did multiple tests, for example, that covered the same lines, you would see in here like a list of tests and which lines they covered.
So these successful tests were all tests that it realized were fired by the Postman script, right? This is nothing to do with PHP unit at this point.
It's actually, well, it's both, because we ran PHP unit, which output that PHP file that I showed you.
Yeah.
And then when I did my write command, actually when I did my coverage stuff, it sucked that in first.
Right.
So it included all the PHP unit stuff.
But none of this OAuth stuff was part of that.
None of the OAuth stuff was part of that. Yeah, these are all the Postman requests that I made.
But the first file you shared was PHP.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, so what I'm showing here is that this output is actually a blend of the PHP unit stuff and the Postman stuff. We can see it both. We see coverage for all of our tests in this output.
Very cool.
Cool. I'm glad it's very cool. I was excited about it. And to be clear, this green doesn't mean that the test passed. It means that the code was executed. These lines of code were executed. Okay. these lines of code weren't executed. Okay. So, really quickly at a high level, we can sort of get a very good sense. Okay, well, we've got 31% coverage. This is covered really well. This isn't covered at all. Like some of these things we probably don't care about. We do care about user, like our user model. That should be tested better. So we start to get a good sense of what's being tested, what's not being tested. Okay. So we look at coverage. Okay, the last thing that we need to do, I actually showed it to you already, but we need to merge those results together. So if you recall, I showed you the JSON that we get out of Postman and Newman, the test result output. Out of PHP unit comes an XML document. And that's actually the real structure that we need because that's what Jenkins expects, and that's what it's going to use to say the build passed or failed. So we need to walk the JSON result, adding each test suite and each test case to the XML result, and then write out the merge result, bless you. And so that we're not totally lost in the code, I sort of put in here, there's a lot of things in both of these documents, but the things that we care about are here. We care about the name of the request, we care about the total time that it took, and we care about the individual tests. So in this case, this name indicates a test suite in the parlance of JUnit, test suite, and then these are test cases. So here we have a test suite called whatever request name, and then there's one or many test cases in that test suite. Okay, so not really rocket science here, but we're going to merge test results. So like I said, all we're doing is we're doing a simple XML load of the PHP unit stuff. We're doing a load in of the JSON, the Newman results. We are then going to walk, for each result in the Newman Postman output. We're going to create a test suite. There's no way to differentiate how much time each test case takes. I mean, really, the vast majority of your time, let's say it takes 200 milliseconds to make a web service request. It's going to take 201 milliseconds and 1 more millisecond to run your tests because it's all local and just doing some JavaScript stuff. So really, I just divide the total time divided by the number of tests to sort of come at approximately how long it takes for each test. And then I add each test case, and I add it to our XML. We mark all the failures if there's a failure. That's important. And then we write out the merged XML document. Okay, so what that looks like is if we take a look right now at the test results, we would see something like this. Okay, so there's just the one test that we know about, the PHP unit test that we've authored, test domain attribute. Okay, if we run this merge results, it's going to then create test results. It's not going to create anything because I need to run Newman. It's not going to run anything. Oh, in the wrong directory, merged. So then it creates this merged version, which still has our individual unit tests, but then it also lists blogs, get blog 2, login, get me. It's got some times in here and so forth. Okay, so now what we can do is we can plug this into Jenkins, and like we saw all those individual tests before, well, we saw one test. Now we're going to see all of the tests from our web service testing. Okay. So let's do that. So what we need to do then is go back into Jenkins. We need to update the script to turn on collection, run PHP unit, run Newman, and then write out the merged data and look at it. So if we do that, let's go back into Jenkins. So we're going to go back into configuring this job. And instead of just running PHP unit, we're going to run a whole lot more stuff. Okay, so we're going to turn on collection. This is the command that we saw. We're going to execute PHP unit. This is the flag to capture that code coverage for PHP unit. We're going to make sure that we've got a place to put, this is actually some legacy stuff, but I needed to make sure that this directory was here in my live build environment. We're going to run Newman with the collection that we have using our local environment and our collection, here, collection.json. Okay. No color, this is a helpful little flag if you're running this in like a terminal that doesn't understand color. If you don't have this flag, it puts a bunch of gibberish and makes it really hard to read. So no color is useful. And then we're going to write out the coverage data, and we're going to merge our XML, our results for the PHP unit. Okay, so that's our new script. We're going to change this to, instead of just PHP unit, we want the merged results. Okay, and we want to include our code coverage data. And we want to publish the HTML report that we're building too. Okay, let's save that.
Is that the merged one?
What? I'm sorry?
I think you missed the merged one, right?
Oh, maybe. Let me see.
You got the merged in there.
Clover merged.
Okay, there it is.
Okay, cool. Probably won't work even though we looked at it twice, but let's see. Okay. So now it's building. And again, we can see the console output. So this is, again, kind of cool. We can see the individual tests that are run. And we now have these two new buttons that weren't there before, Clover HTML report and Clover summary. If you go back to the project, we're actually going to do a test result trend. So we can see we went from 1 test to 5. We get our coverage, at a high level. And straight from here, we can look at the report and see, again, exactly the data that we expected to see. Cool? Okay. One other thing, I'm going to go ahead and... So I actually have a collection here that's got some more stuff in it. I'll pull it up into Postman just so you can see what's here. Okay, so it's got some of the stuff we already saw, listing the blogs and get blogs, and I've also got one to try and add a blog. So this is, a negative test case. I'm not logged in. I shouldn't be able to add a blog. I'm going to expect I get a 401. All right, that's what I should get. I'm going to log in. I'm going to get some info about myself. I've got a bunch of additional tests here. So for example, not only do I expect the response code to be 200, I expect my user ID to be 1 because I know it's the first user I've added in the seeder. I expect my email to be foo@fooblog.com and my name to be fooblogger. Okay, I'm going to add a blog. I'm going to assert that the response that I get back is the value of the data that I post up. And I'm going to update the blog and assert that the blog's value has changed as well. So again, I can run this in the collection runner. See that everything passes. That's good. Okay, and now I can run this in my environment. Okay, it's building. Same deal here. We're going to see a whole bunch more tests that run. And if we look back at our project, cool. We're now at 16 test results. We're at 35% coverage. Okay, and we can see again here we've got our unit test that ran, and we'll have all of our other stuff too. So if we look at, not that, if we look at, for example, blog controller, we're 100% covered on blog controller. We did it, guys. We did it. Didn't think we would, did you? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's at a high level. That's how it works. Questions so far? Okay. All right. In the real world, just we talk about that a little bit. What I do, what we looked at was a build script, and this looks largely the same as what I was showing you here in the build script. I've also got a post build script. So maybe one thing worth showing you is let's fail something. Let's see if this is a 201, right? Save, export. Okay, and let's run it. Okay, it's building. So now I've got an unstable based on this build's configuration. It tells me that this specific build failed. And again, in the configuration, I can choose what unstable means, right? I've got enough passing criteria that, like in a test environment, I would roll this out, right? But I could, again, change the criteria, so in a production environment, I wouldn't roll it out. But we get, nice, clear data about all the tests that were run, how long they took to run, what changed, in our from the previous build. So a lot of really good data. It's also really easy to, like in Jenkins, they've got this RSS feed. Easy. Now you know whenever a build happens and if it failed or succeeded, and your whole team can know. So I can't stress enough. People sort of get freaked out by Jenkins or whatever because they think it's complicated. It's not. It's not complicated. Get a lot of value out of it for doing very little. Okay.
So does it make, as a developer, I mean, does it make sense to run Jenkins on your local machine to have it, or
Nah.
no?
No. I mean, if you were building all the time, maybe it might be useful for you. But honestly, what we do most of is, like, I'm not interested in seeing code coverage every single test cycle because it takes longer, right? I just want to see that my tests pass. So I'm doing that in the command line. I'm just bringing up Newman, enter, we're good, right? And then it's when I move it into test is where I start getting my first sense of test coverage. If I'm adding a whole bunch of new code, I might do it beforehand, but typically not.
Yeah. So for the individual developer, just run the PHP unit, Newman,
Yeah.
at command line.
Yeah, and that's really for PHP. Some other languages, especially compiled languages, if you've got to go through a series of steps to get something.
We're talking about PHP.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, for PHP, I wouldn't run it all the time. I don't run it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not useful. But what we can do with Jenkins is we run our tests, we see if it passes or fails, and then I've got a post-build script here that uses some variables. So here I've got build ID. So what I do is I build in a workspace. I do whatever takes a long time, composer install, can take forever sometimes, and do all my testing, and everything looks good. Then I copy that directory to a builds folder. So now I've got every single release I do, I've got a state in time of literally like byte for byte what was released in a directory. And then I just swap out, I just change a symlink. It's live. Right? I'm not copying 1,000 files, they're already there. It's a symlink, it's done, it's live. And then I do migration. Actually, so somebody asked me if I migrate first or not. Apparently I put code out first and then I migrate because that's what it shows here. So, okay.
Before you move the symlink, right?
What's that?
That's before you move the symlink.
No. So here I move the symlink and then I migrate. I might want to rethink that. I don't know, because the migrate could take a little while. I don't know. I don't know why I did that way. I probably had a reason at some point. And we actually have a number of production servers, so we actually do a sync out. So we're using rsync. So whatever the differences we're copying over. Okay. So. Talk about scalability. What we have in our environment, we're running 549 tests of this type, Postman, across 111 requests. On my sandbox, it takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds to run that whole suite with coverage. It takes about 90 seconds without coverage. This doesn't scale linearly. If I added another 111 requests, it wouldn't be 9 minutes. It would be less than that because there's some overhead and some startup stuff and all that. But you can see it's nowhere near as fast as unit testing. You can run thousands of unit tests, in this time. So it's not nearly as fast. The coverage object that we're putting in out of cache with this set of data, with 549 tests and 111 requests, gets to about 3.2 megs. Not a big deal. Also, it's not going to scale linearly. It's less than that because there's some overhead. And then writing the output takes about 15 seconds for the XML and about 10 seconds for the HTML. On a build server, 5 minutes. It's not a big deal. Okay. Questions about this scalability? How we're using it in production?
Do you deploy to your production server from Jenkins?
Yes.
Was that sync script?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, literally, what this sync script does, if we were to pull the curtain way back, we're using Puppet. You guys are familiar with Puppet, and Puppet has a list of the production servers, and it's on the fly generating this sync.sh bash script, very simple, that just rsyncs to every server in the production pool.
But you're not running Jenkins on your production machine, so.
Oh, no. This is a build server. This is specifically a build server. Yes. And so, like, whatever the resources, the database, Redis, whatever, like there's Elasticsearch we're using, all that's on the build server, its own little environment.
What happens if you build here, you go live, you push this, but the push fails? Does it have like a rollback mechanism to that script?
I don't right now. You certainly could, and like I said, so for me, what I'm doing is it would be a manual process. I could create a Jenkins script to do it, so I don't have to log into the server. But what I would do is push the symlink back to the previous build and hit sync. Yeah, assuming there aren't big migrations that need to be unwound, I'd have to do that as well. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, like, why did you choose Jenkins over, say, one of the cloud hosting services like Travis?
It was free.
Is it free though?
Jenkins? Yeah. Is it free? No, I am tied to it. I'm shackled. No. Yeah, really, that's.
Yeah, I mean, I asked because, like, I heard a joke a while ago, but it's like Linux and open source programs, they're free if you don't value time.
Yeah.
Because there's a time component to you setting it up and maintaining that service yourself. So,
Absolutely.
What's your cost benefit to maintaining Jenkins?
Well, I can tell you that I don't spend a whole lot of time on it. I'm really happy with it. And I didn't even do. Really, the way this evolved was I need to do some like build management, just even in like staging and test. So let me roll out Jenkins. Okay, this is easy. Okay, it works. Okay, I'm just going with it in production. And I didn't even like really look at Travis CI. I'm using, for the first time, I used Travis for this dialect project that I've got, and that's free because it's an open source project. But I didn't go through like the matrix. Like I don't know if Travis CI, if I can use an LDAP authentication to control who's got access to do what. Maybe I don't know, but I didn't even go so far as to vet that out. To be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know if Travis, some of those do scripts after. There's some that handle like deployment. I think it runs scripts. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, on Postman, can you do that with your logging in PHP sessions?
Oh, like can you? So if you're using sessions, can you save the state and then persist that in the next request? Yes. Yeah.
And then doesn't Laravel do something where every time it gives a brand new cookie?
Oh, that's up to you. That's how you configure Laravel. There's in Laravel 5, it's part of the HTTP middleware. I turned it off actually for this. I didn't show it to you, but like there's no, again, like RESTful, whatever. In the REST paradigm, you state is it's a stateless thing, like, and you shouldn't be passing cookies back up. You use var tokens for that, which contain the state. But you can absolutely do that with Jenkins or with a Postman rather. Yeah.
And then Laravel you can just turn it anyway, because I run that before I was trying to automate some of the typing that, but then every time in a session you would get new cookies, so it was hard to do it from three steps.
Right. Yeah. No, you can. I mean. Yeah, you can. So I showed you capturing the request body, but you can capture any component of the request that comes back. You can save that as a variable. You can pass it up as a header, which is all that a cookie is.
Capture something that's in the header as well.
Absolutely.
Great.
For the cookie part, do you need an interceptor?
No. No. The way you would do it is, like I said, rather than capturing remember there's JSON parse request body. You have access to the headers as well. You could basically parse that out and set your session variable based on what is returned back to you.
You know what the interceptor is for? I enabled, I don't know what I use it for.
Yes, yeah, I've used it for two things. It's integrated into Chrome, so you can turn on the interceptor, be browsing in Chrome, and it is actually capturing every request that Chrome is making. So then you can go back into Postman, and you can see in your request history all those things that you did, and you've got all the whatever was posted, or if it was a put request, all the request body, the headers, everything is in there, so you know the request that was made. That's the primary use case. The other thing that you use the interceptor for.
So is that kind of like a synergy? Or that's like Selenium. Is it kind of like a Selenium thing?
No. Selenium lets you like do a bunch of stuff, as I understand it, with the UI. Like I want to push a button, I want to select something in a DOM and activate something, and you wouldn't do any of that with interceptor. Is literally at the HTTP level. Okay. I see that HTTP content went up. I capture everything about that request, and then I've got it in my history now.
Yeah.
The other thing you can use it for is there are some headers that are off limits typically, like the origin header. If you're doing cores, anybody familiar with cross-site, whatever that is? You really can't fudge with that too much. With Interceptor, you have full control over the headers that are sent. And I actually had to do that for part of this project.
So I saw it for no reason. I thought it was the other way. Postman was using Chrome to send the request.
No.
But it was the other way.
No, yeah, other way around. Yeah.
Well, now that's still useful. Maybe you won't use it.
No, it is very useful if you like, especially if you want to see what a website is doing. You know, you get I mean, I guess it's kind of like the inspector. It's think about it like this. You can open up the inspector and see what's going on, but then you have to like copy and paste all that stuff in a Postman. So this sort of just does it for you. Yeah.
Not to go into the history. It's full.
It's probably if it's an on, it's full of stuff. I think it keeps the last 10. I think it's some sane number.
You just use that as one.
It's always been on. I've always had it there.
Yeah.
Oh, there was something!
Okay. Any other questions? All right. I'm gonna get on my soapbox, and then I'm gonna get off my soapbox real quick. But so you know, the highest level question is like, why are we doing this test automation, right? And my answer to that is, for me, it's so that we can change code with confidence. I don't ever want to have the sacred core component of our website that we know we should change, but we don't because we don't know what the unintended consequences are. And so if I've got really rigorous code coverage and test automation, it makes it very easy for me to tweak something and see right away that there were all these ripple effects out there, and I can quickly sort of track those down and know what's going on. So that's my metric of whether or not we're doing test automation right, is how confident am I and how confident are my developers that their change isn't going to break something. Okay. We talked a little bit about unit tests and integration tests. So in my mind, unit tests are for you, the developer. They are very granular, and they make it very easy for you to know what bits of code to fix when something is broken, like down to the line of code. Integration tests, on the other hand, are for the business, and they test the application at a broad level. So like I can give you examples of when we've got this in place, we fail one of the Postman tests, and it takes us like literally half a day to track it down. You don't get that with unit tests. Unit tests, you know exactly what's broken down. With this, you don't. It casts a very wide net. We get a whole lot of coverage really quickly, which is great, but it doesn't pinpoint exactly where the issue is, and we're going to maybe execute 1,000 lines of code in a single integration test. But we do know with confidence that when it passes, that whole thing is going to work, that people are going to be able to pay, they're going to be able to download, or whatever they're supposed to download, that the system is going to work. Okay, code coverage. What does code coverage really get you? So I had an interesting conversation with Andy and Juan were part of it, I think, when I showed some of this a while back to some colleagues of mine and got some really good feedback. And out of that came these ideas. It gives you a couple things. It lets you know where to focus your testing. So if you're going to build new tests, you know what isn't tested at all. Okay, and it also lets you know when you add a lot of new code that isn't tested. So in Jenkins, we see those graphs. If I'm at 40% coverage and I drop to 30, well, okay, now there's an event that I need to pay attention to. So it makes it really easy to track some of that kind of stuff, and that can be useful. What it doesn't tell you is whether or not your code works all the time, right? I can have 100% coverage, and let's say I have one function and I have one test. That's 100% coverage, but I'm only sending up one bit of data, right? If I send up a different bit of data, the thing might fail. So it doesn't tell me that my application is perfect. Okay. So how much coverage is good? So we already know the 100% coverage doesn't mean 100% perfect code. Coverage establishes a baseline to manage to. Like I said, if you get to 40%, you kind of know where you are, and you can track up and down. What I recommend is that you worry about the things that matter and not about the code coverage number. And so to illustrate this, imagine you have a very simple application that has two functions. One is it's a donation application. One is to donate a bunch of money, right? And the other is to get a little smiley face after you've done the donation. And 10% of your users use the smiley face function. All of your users use the donation function. Let's say that you've got a constraint. You can only write 2 tests, right? Do you write one test for each function and get 100% coverage? Or do you write two tests for the function that matters to everybody? You only have 50% coverage, but you have more coverage of the thing that matters. In my mind, that's what you do, right? You go after what matters. So don't chase a number, whatever that number is, 80%, 100%, whatever. Don't chase that number. If you're at 40%, but that 40% covers the things that really matter and you can change code with confidence, you're winning. And now I'm done. Any other questions? I know it's late.
That was phenomenal.
Awesome. Yes.
What kind of related? Is there any difference between REST and RESTful?
Yeah. So I don't really want to get into it, but yes. There's. I mean, if yes.
Oh yeah, that's just never really.
Some would argue there's no such thing as RESTful.
Some would argue because arguing is fun. Yeah. So okay, hey guys, I really appreciate it. It was super fun to chat with you, and if you got other questions, feel free to reach me. Okay.
The emerging stuff is kind of.
So one more, Karen.
So you said you recorded this, right?
I did. Yeah. I'm actually going to check on that right now.
Because I need to watch it like 4 times. That'll be awesome. Oh, those yours.